Oh my god.
Yeah, that's me, getting scared at one of Resident Evil 9's many jump scares. It's also at this point when I thought, why are video games such an effective means of horror? Now, I think to tackle this efficiently, we should begin to talk about the survival horror genre is probably the biggest one out of all the horror game genres that there is. From Resident Evil to Silent Hill, Alan Wake, the genre itself has spanned decades of gaming. But what makes it just that good? Well, one of the reasons is atmosphere. These games thrive on their atmosphere and setup. One of my favourite games that come to mind is Resident Evil 7. This game uses a full suite of new things for the series. The first person angle in the game is really terrifying. The Baker house is damp, aged, and the game has got like a found footage vibe. Also, the lighting in this game is insane. It uses the RE engine, and it's probably one of the first ones I think to use it, and it's genuinely a gorgeous looking game. Since these games rely on you as a protagonist, player agency is incredibly important. Fear is a human emotion. Masato Komizawa said this, a producer on Resident Evil, and this is a core of horror games. A horror game dev wants to elicit a sense of fear. They want to activate your fight or flight. You feel connected to the protagonist as their life is in your hands, so in turn, your fear is their fear. Agency in horror games can also make horror a more enjoyable experience. Look, I know that sounds stupid, but you know as a person, pushing through a scary experience can in turn release some kind of dopamine hit. It triggers that rush and thrill-seeking experience that one might look for. When mentioning agency, it's hard not to talk about choice-based horror games. The biggest one that comes to mind is Until Dawn. It's heavily influenced by the slasher films of old. Its core system is in its butterfly effect. Essentially, when you make a choice, that choice causes a chain reaction that sets something up for later on. This gives you, the player, the long-term consequences of your actions. You feel like through the game, the fate of these people are in your hands. Any one of them can die on a first playthrough, and they probably most likely will. The horror is more built up around you, and how tense you feel because you control the story, and you are ultimately the one that has to make these hard choices. Another choice-based horror game I love is Slay the Princess. It sets itself up as a simple story. You must slay the princess, otherwise the world will end. But it plays with the idea of the unreliable narrator, whom you can constantly argue with or just go along with. The horror is never really jump scares, it's more of the choices you have to make and the moral dilemmas it puts you in.
Does it? Are you a monarchist? Is slaying a princess that much worse than slaying a fisherman or a miller or a seamstress? If anything, slaying a princess is much better than slaying a seamstress. Seamstresses contribute something of value to society.
You often see the princess transform into grotesque and eldritch horrors, reflecting the terror the player has inflicted on her. I don't want to spoil the ending of the game, as it's a game I highly recommend, and it's an amazing experience. Seriously, check it out. Another key to the great and effective horror in video games is the stalker enemies, something you can't really get much in other media. A stalker enemy, essentially, is an entity that's sole purpose is to hunt you down in a game. But what puts it apart from other NPCs is their ability to learn and adapt. There's some simple examples of stalker enemies in games, like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 or Jack Baker in Resident Evil 7. But I think the most effective one is the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation. The Xenomorph in this game was created with the idea that it's unpredictable and it learns. You will quickly understand that this is an intelligent creature that adapts to you. For example, if the player hides in vents and lockers too much, the Xenomorph will clock this and begin to search said lockers and vents. If the player uses noisemakers too often, the Xenomorph will eventually stop caring for them and instead figure out where they were thrown from. If the player uses a flamethrower to repel the Xenomorph, then it will try to ambush the player instead of coming head on. As you can see, this thing is smart, meaning it creates a non-scripted player experience where you have to know, or more or less guess, how to make the Xeno act, so you can best beat it. The AI to the Xenomorph is also super interesting. It uses a two-tier AI system, where in the first tier, known as the Director, will always know where the player is. Then it makes sure that the Xenomorph is always nearby to keep close tension. Then there's the Agent AI, which is the actual creature. It doesn't know where the player is, and it relies on its vision, sound, and scent to hunt. What's great about Alien Isolation is, there's a sequel being made. Yay!
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
If you know anything about horror games, you'll most likely know about Silent Hill in some capacity. But I believe Silent Hill 2 is one of the most interesting narratives in any horror game. In Silent Hill 2, we follow James Sunderland as he enters the town of Silent Hill in order to look for his wife. However, Silent Hill isn't exactly real. It's an entity. Well, to be precise, it's more of a mirror. It forces the person to tackle with their greatest fears, guilts, and traumas. In James's case, his wife Mary was never in Silent Hill. She's been dead, and it was James who killed her. She was terminally ill, and James couldn't bear to see her wither away. Sorry for the spoilers, but the game's been out for years, so, whatever. Anyway, the town of Silent Hill is built around James's psyche. As you explore, you learn more about James and what Silent Hill really is. I think what makes it so compelling for a player is that you can do the bare minimum and experience a different story from someone who explored and took their time. The ending isn't determined by actions labelled as good or evil, but how the player acts in this world and how they experience it. Characters like Berea are manifestations of the part James liked about Mary, and characters like the infamous Pyramid Head are manifestations of the punishment James puts on himself. Overall, it's a deeply personal story, and one that if the player can connect with, can feel driven and even changed by it. It's psychological horror at its finest, but it's also very human horror. There's no clear-cut good, and that's okay, and all the endings are all bittersweet. So, overall, this ramble was to mainly show how I think horror games are the most effective form of horror media. Horror movies and books can elicit some of these feelings, but in horror games, you are in the scenario. You are the driving force. To close this off, as I have no idea how to do that properly, I'm going to list 3 horror games that I think are great and you should maybe check out, alongside the other ones I've already mentioned in this video. Okay, so I know how it looks, however, I can't stress how integral this is to how the game plays, how it acts, and how it scares you. It's hard to describe this game without spoiling it, so I'm not gonna really say much about it. All I'm gonna say is, she knows, she's listening, and just Monica. Once again, I really can't say too much or I'll spoil this game, but it's a really, really good psychological horror game, where the choices you make are more or less ambiguous, or not explicit. It's hard to explain, but it's a game that really, really does make you think. This is a really interesting game because it came out fairly recently and it has such a prominent story. I mean, it's depressing and it's bleak, but once you fully grasp the situation and everything that's going on, it just clicks. The game just clicks and it's such an amazing experience. A very harrowing one, but an amazing one. And that's about it, really. Horror games are a continuously evolving medium, so, hundreds of new horror games are released yearly, and even more on indie sites like itch.io. I really recommend digging around, because you will definitely find a game that speaks to you. So, hopefully that's made you want to try a horror game, or 2, or none. Some people just don't like it, and that's completely fine. I just think, personally, that they have some of the deepest stories that you can connect to as a human being. And I hope, maybe, someone who's watched this will try one, and see that they're not, they're terrifying. Most of them are terrifying, but they have meaning, they're not just scary. But yeah, horror is the main part of it, so I guess they are kind of just scary.
What will it take just to find that special day?